It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day and welcome, listeners, to the Two Jacks, episode 39, being recorded on the 8th of the 8th, 2023, the morning of. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good, excellent.
That's the way. Now, we're going to kick off with I don't know what we call this anymore, Jack. It's just so messy. Is it? Do we call it the Sofronoff inquiry? Do we call it the Drumgold affair? I just don't know. But it relates, of course, to the ACT's chief prosecutor until yesterday, or until late last week, and his perceived failures in a report. He more or less kicked off the investigation.
Well, it certainly wouldn't have happened without his furious letter, which he sent at the end after he abandoned the trial of Bruce Lehrmann.
Yes, so this is just so our listeners are on board. This is in regard to the attempt to prosecute Bruce Lehrmann over the alleged rape of Brittney Higgins. And that trial, of course, came, basically fell apart when a juror misconducted himself, I believe. And afterwards, Drumgold indicated that taking Brittney Higgins' health into consideration, no retrial would take place. And then afterwards, he made allegations that the police, ACT police, had failed to show real prosecutorial intent, Jack. Is that fair?
That's probably fair. He abandoned the trial on the morning on which the Chief Justice, Lucy McCallum, was going to make public an application that the defence had made, and we don't know what the content of that was, and we probably never will.
Right. What's your best guess? It'd be a no bill, wouldn't it?
And it'd be a no bill
request.
Exactly. And they would have had reasons why they were asking for that. And we'll never know that. And on that very morning or the night before, he notified the Chief Justice that he would be abandoning the trial. And after he abandoned the trial, he wrote a furious letter to the Attorney General, et cetera, complaining about police conduct and what he saw as political interference.
Political interference, yes.
From ministers of the Crown. And the ACT government seemed happy enough to go along with the idea of an inquiry, although I don't think they would have initiated this without his furious letter.
And that, in turn, led to appointing Justice Sofronoff to conduct an inquiry where it was found Drumgold. Has he done a Jack Elliott call for the inquiry and then got knocked off by it?
I see someone on Twitter described it as the greatest legal act of self-harm since Oscar Wilde sued the Marquess of Queensberry for defamation. You might remember that. Poor Oscar, the defamation trial didn't go all that well, and he was in fact charged with offences relating to homosexuality, I think we'd put them.
That's right, and ended up in the jug.
Ended up in Reading Jail writing a letter about it.
The course of the inquiry exposed that he had behaved unethically, and that indeed was the finding of Justice Sofronoff.
More specifically, Sofronoff found that he had lost objectivity, that he had, in the opinion of Justice Sofronoff, had lied to the Chief Justice. And he had failed to disclose relevant material to the defence.
Yes.
He failed to advise Lisa Wilkinson against making the speech she made at the Logies, although he did note, and correctly so, that she worked for an organisation that had plenty of lawyers working for him, and they should have told her the same thing. And that his press conference after the trial was abandoned was a poor piece of judgment because he when he came out and made the press conference, he sounded like an advocate for Brittney Higgins rather than a director of public prosecutions abandoning a trial.
Right. So where are we now? The report Sofronoff inquiry report was leaked to the Australian. I'm told it appeared in the hands of journalists at the Australian before the Commissioner of Police, etc. Is that where we're going now?
Well, it seems to be filling the newspapers and the media now that they're all in on talking about how the leak happened and how terrible that was. I think because they don't want to address the substance of the report.
Okay, so that's exactly how I feel about it too. If things fall off the back of trucks and trailers and end up in the hands of journalists, well, that's just probably leads to greater accountability in the end. But what are those issues, Jack? What are those issues arising? And when we talk about a prosecutor, the basically chief prosecutor in the ACT, what broader consequences does this have for the judicial system around the country when you've got prosecutors who are found to have been misconducting themselves and behaving unethically?
The first thing it does is it leads to a great outbreak of hope on the part of those who've been convicted by the same arising out of prosecutions brought by the same person.
Yes.
That they may be able to reopen their cases and get.
Well, that's lawyer X writ large, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's in
Victoria.
But the ACT government says that they've had a look at that and that's not the case. Right. But there's a bit of Mandy Rice Davies about that. He would say that, wouldn't he? You know,
yeah.
And,
it's a pretty difficult thing to do, having to review. There is a number attached to it, the number of prosecutions which Drumgold has been associated with, and they could have been internally reviewed. But what broader implications does it have on the back of Lawyer X too, Jack, about prosecutors becoming biased and losing their objectivity?
Well, I think it's broader than just Lawyer X and the Lehrmann case. I would throw in, as a recent example, the Cardinal Pell prosecution, and say that it's perhaps time that we had a look at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. It only dates back 20 or 30 years, like in the early 80s. It started in Australia. It was an import from the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And the idea of it was to take the decision to prosecute and the conduct of prosecution out of the hands of the Attorney General's Department, where it was generally run by someone called the Crown Counsel.
Right, Crown Prosecutor, yes.
Crown Prosecutor or Crown Counsel, depending on which state you're in. And put it in the hands of a sort of semi-independent figure. And
who operate in secrecy, Jack. And there's good reasons for that, aren't there? I mean, you know.
And the system generally works very well, I think. But it's perhaps after the 30 or 40 years, whatever it is, it might be time to have a look at that again.
I think what we have in Lawyer X, as opposed to, shall we say, now the Sofronoff matter, is that we've got one shows perhaps at least a perceived closeness with senior police, and that's the case of the Lawyer X, while it would seem to be a breakdown of a relationship in the ACT.
Yeah, and in the Cardinal Pell case, the police were very keen to prosecute. Their brief was sent back by the Director of Public Prosecutions twice with this is not good enough to take to trial. And they persisted until they found that they had a new Director of Public Prosecutions who agreed with them enough to take the thing to trial.
Yeah, look, there's a number of things that occurred there, of course, as we know now, that one of the victims, alleged victims, I should say, in regard to Pell, he withdrew He withdrew before, and so that prosecution fell over. He alleged that he was indecently dealt with in a shower at the presbytery, the Ballarat Presbytery, I believe. And he had brought those charges were brought, and then he decided basically the day before the trial was to commence, it might have even been on the day the trial was due to commence, that he was going to withdraw.
Yeah, there was even from up here in Hong Kong, I was aware that there was considerable part of the legal profession in Melbourne who thought that the case was very weak. The whole case against Cole was very weak. And I'm not talking about Catholic lawyers, this is across the board. And you get this from time to time. You get a difference of opinion between police and the DPP as to whether or not a case should proceed. And that's no bad thing in itself. I just think that relationship perhaps is worth looking at again after 40 years of running these offices.
Yeah, look, I can certainly agree with you on that. I think it is something that occurs in the shadows, and there is certainly a need for a lot of secrecy in terms of evidence and in terms of what can be prosecuted and can't be. But there are two fundamental failures here that we're looking at. I'd certainly say Lawyer X, the fact that no one will now be charged over what could easily be described as a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. And now we've got Drumgold possibly facing those charges. What happens with him now, Jack? He's resigned. His position was untenable. What happens with him now?
Yeah, well, he went on leave immediately after having given evidence to the inquiry, and personally, I thought his career was pretty much over. Right about his career as the DPP.
I did see
him over about then.
I think the Oz papped him, Jack, out the front of his house having an ale, having a tin.
Yeah, I think he was having a tin with his son while his son was working on a car in the driveway.
Something like that. Yeah.
But I thought his career as DPP was pretty much over then. There's a bit of excitability around about whether he'd be prosecuted and sent to jail for all this. But firstly, not all the evidence that got before Sofronoff would be available in a trial for perverting the course of justice. It's been bandied around. And there's a different standard of proof as well. So the chance of him being firstly prosecuted and secondly being convicted, I think, is pretty slim.
But it does beg the question, Jack, who's going to make this decision?
I think it'll be the Attorney General in the end. There is a Deputy DPP operating now, but effectively I think it will be the Attorney General, Shane Rattenbury. Is that his name?
I believe so.
Yeah.
He's been very quiet of late, Jack.
And very sensibly so. I think he needs to keep his head down because he's going to have a role to play in the way this pans out, and he can't afford to give the appearance that he has biased one way or the other.
I did see an interview with the Chief Minister in the ACT, Andrew Barr.
He's the mayor, is he?
He's the mayor of Canberra.
The mayor of the local council.
There was a piece in the Australian from Jeff Chambers, who's in the parliamentary office for the Australian. He lives in Canberra, of course, and he gave him a nice old spray today, 40 kilometres, the sort of things we were criticising the man for last week, Jack, 40 kilometre speed zones in the CBD with 3 lanes of traffic, or six one way or the other. It's just nutty stuff. But where does this leave Bruce Lehrmann? Does that mean he's got basically carte blanche claim?
Bruce Lehrmann has issued a statement saying that he'd instructed his solicitors to draw up a statement of claim against the ACT, presumably it will be against the ACT and Shane Drumgold. The DPP has a degree of protection in the law against being sued, but it's limited. And if the findings of the Sofronoff inquiry stood up in court, the ACT government would be liable for considerable damages to Bruce Lehrmann.
And what about some of the other players?
If you're a litigation lawyer, you'd be pretty damn pleased to see Bruce Lehrmann waiting in your waiting room as you walked in the office in the morning. You know?
Yes, I imagine so. Where does this leave? We'll get to Brittney Higgins in a moment. Where does this leave former Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, Jack?
Well, the report's pretty kind to her, and I think that's, and from the evidence at the inquiry, and I kind of followed that reasonably closely. I thought they went okay, Reynolds and Cash. I thought that you'd always say, well, look, if we had our time over again, we might have handled it a little bit better, but they got the basics right. And I don't think there's any credible suggestion of her playing, of either of them playing politics with this or interfering in the trial.
Okay, and finally, Jack, Brittney Higgins. I mean, this is justice gone horribly wrong, regardless of anyone's opinion on guilt and innocence. This is just justice gone horribly wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I don't have an opinion at all on what happened that night in Parliament. Safe to say that I've read the accounts of both Brittney Higgins and Bruce Lehrmann and didn't find either of them all that compelling, to be quite honest. But my view is that Brittney Higgins has been done a disservice by those around her who should have dissuaded her from pursuing the case in the way that she did. If you bung on a political and media blue, it's a bit like being the captain telling the fast bowler to put them up, put a few short ones in and put them up. And you have to understand that the other side...
You're going to have to have a bat soon. You're going to have to bet yourself.
Yeah, you're going to have to bet yourself and it will be coming back. And if you bung on a political and media blue in Australia, the game is played very hard indeed, and you're going to have to expect that a bit will come back your way. And she's been subjected to some fairly harsh treatment by leaking of text messages, etc., but that's the cost you pay when you're playing that game.
Isn't that the lesson, though, Jack, for all concerned here, that this was played out in the public forum rather than in the criminal justice forum?
Yes.
I mean, you would argue now, I should certainly argue now what we know now, that putting it in the hands of the criminal justice system was far from perfect.
Yes.
But that's kind of the way it would normally be. But the involvement of media in this, I think, was quite disgraceful early on, certainly before a formal interview was granted. And those people, what should their advice have been, Jack? And we'll talk about a couple of them. Lisa Wilkinson, her husband, Peter Fitzsimmons. What should they have advised Brittney Higgins in the first instance? It shouldn't have been go and talk to the police.
Yes, yeah. And when it became clear that what she wanted to do was run a media campaign, they should have said, don't do this. Because you will get hurt.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson for me too. I mean, I know what journalists are like, Jack, and if they think they've got a red hot story, they want to hold it close to their breast, and they don't want it getting out, and so. That business and look, I've spoken to a number of people over the journey, particularly those people around child sexual assault matters, and my view is always, look, the story comes second, and really what you should be doing is considering going to police and making a report. Where that has not occurred, going to police. I'll often tell them they're better now than they used to be. They won't brush you, and hopefully won't brush you, because I know so many who've been dealt with pretty poorly by police over the journey. But that's the answer. You've got to get it into the criminal justice system, as imperfect as it is, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yes, I agree. It's better than it was. It's not perfect by any means, I don't think,
but it's certainly perfect.
It's certainly better than it was. And the idea that you can put a story into the media and control how that operates is just fantasy land. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It's far too competitive and tough a business for that.
I noticed eminent jurist. I think we can call Richard Ackland an eminent jurist, can't we, Jack?
I think we probably can.
He's been around for a long time anyway.
He's jumped into this.
What's he had to say?
He says the agenda at play is a dizzying cocktail involving reheated remnants of the cultural wars with animus towards the complainant in the case, Brittney Higgins, and the Me Too movement, and complaints about the use of victim-centric language. He does like a florid sentence, doesn't he, Richard?
That's a long one. That is a long one. I only got the one comma in there too. Yeah. Well done, Richard.
I had a bit of a look at Twitter in the last day or so, and they're all lining up on each side now. On the Shane Drumgold side, we've got Wendy Bacon, and Quentin Dempster. They're all lining up. And I saw on this morning's Pearls and Irritations, Jack Waterford's pretty much in the Drumgold camp as well. So,
they used to be journalists who liked to break stories, Jack. Now they're looking after the bloke who was into a bit of a cover-up.
Yeah.
Strange position.
Now they've suddenly discovered that leaks are not a good thing.
Yeah, and most would have been publishing leaked material, made their careers out of it. How odd. Now, Jack, very, very sad, tragic story in Leongatha and Curramborough, two towns in Gippsland, southern Gippsland, actually, part of the world you know, but just you were raised as a country boy, weren't you? And one of the lessons you learn as a country boy is pay attention for snakes and don't eat the mushrooms.
Well, no, we ate plenty of the mushrooms, but you turned them over and had a look at them to make sure they were mushrooms.
It's got to be brown upside down, don't they? I still wouldn't eat field mushrooms, and I have gone picking them, but I never have a bar of them.
Yeah, no, I love the fresh field mushrooms. Absolutely gorgeous, a great eat. And we were probably not adventurous enough. I mean, some of the migrant people I know, new Australians I know, we're much more adventurous in going up into the pine forests and stuff around Ballarat and finding our equivalent
psilocybin mushrooms, Jack.
Or finding our equivalent of porcini mushrooms, etc. But. No, people ate a lot of field mushrooms, but they were generally careful to make sure they were mushrooms.
I think there's a great deal of concern. I mean, this is a very, very awful situation where we've now got three elderly people dead, very prominent in their community in Curramborough. I know that your father and mother, Jack, lived down that way for a long time, around Leongatha and I think Meenian they were living in, and for a fair time. So this is around that part of the world.
They moved there when I was at boarding school, but they did tell me, so I didn't go back home to the wrong place.
No, that's nice. So we got a very, very tragic situation where the host of a luncheon on July 29, I'm very proud to say that the Australian was the first with this story, paid host to 4 people and had her own 2 children present. So there were 7 people present there. And from what we can determine, and I don't want to go too far with this, the host of the lunch, Aaron Paterson, who's 48 years of age, did not fall ill. And it would seem to me is unlikely to have consumed the same food that the 4 adults did. The 2 kids were fed something else, we believe. All 7 were hospitalised and examined, but of course the 4 fell ill. This is where we first came to the story, that there were 4 people so ill that they'd require liver transplants, and then one died on the 4th of August, followed by another on the same day. And that's when the police got involved. They weren't really involved before that, and they made some odd statements that weren't quite correct initially about how many people were at this lunch, and they got their numbers a bit wrong, and we came back to them with what we thought were our numbers. But It's left 3 people dead, including Erin Patterson's in-laws, Gail and Don Patterson, both in their elderly stage of their lives, and Heather Wilkinson, all from Currambara. They're all now deceased. And the 4th victim, Ian Wilkinson, is in a critical condition in hospital awaiting a liver transplant. In fact, all 4 had liver failure and would have required liver transplants, but had they survived the poisoning, but the 3 obviously didn't. Jack, we've got an evolving story here. But I just want to ask you about possible charges. If this was accidental, but the woman involved had been negligent, is she likely to be charged with any criminal offences?
They're difficult things to prove, these things. Murder, of course, requires an intent to kill or cause grievous bodily harm. And manslaughter, it's enough if there's evidence that a person was recklessly indifferent to whether they caused the same sort of harm or was negligent. But they're not easy cases by any means. And I don't know anywhere near enough about this case to have a view about it. But
I just wondered if, let's say, there had been previous events where people had fallen ill from food prepared by this woman, and I am simply speculating, Jack. Would that change matters at all?
It could. There's a concept called similar fact evidence, which can be used. But I must confess that I'm a little rusty on the state of the law in that particular area.
All right. Well, we'll move on from that. Just a very, very, very strange, curious case, but an awful tragedy for a small community. I think all 5 of the adults were linked to the Baptist Church in Leongatha, and in fact, I think one of them was a
retired pastor. I think
is a pastor, and apparently. All the stories are that they were wonderful contributors to community. I believe Heather Wilkinson used to conduct little commemoration ceremonies at retirement and nursing homes when people passed away there, and they seem to be sort of salts of the earth types, Jack.
It is that sort of community. It's a reasonably conservative and fairly religious community down there.
Yeah. Okay. It's a tragic case. And we'll have more on it as it evolves. The Voice, Jack, we now have a date, October 14, for the referendum.
Yep.
What do we talk? 2 weeks past footy season ending, and that's rugby league and AFL. No clashes there, and I think it'll be a week after the, I think it's a Labor Day holiday in New South Wales.
It is.
So no clashes there too. So that's kind of an anticipated date there. The polling's not looking good, Jack. News poll published yesterday, showing it dipped below 50 in Victoria, I believe, and losing in Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia and Queensland. And that reflects pretty much where the polling is going.
The most interesting part of the polling that I saw was a poll done by Redbridge, only 1,000 people, but Redbridge, Cos Samaras, I think, is a director there, who's also the head of the John Curtin Institute. So Redbridge found that after hearing the yes and no cases, 1 in 4, 25% of those people who had been leaning towards a yes vote switched to no.
59-41. Yeah.
So that's...
God only knows what that...
That's a bad situation for yes.
Yeah, you would think the John Curtin Research Centre are not going to sort of give them inflammatory sort of information that would turn their minds.
But the key thing is, once they were shown what the cases were, a quarter of the people leaning towards yes, once they knew what it was about, said, we're going to vote no. That's pretty damning.
Now, Chris Kenny, Chris was on the Reconciliation Council government appointment about 4 or 5 years ago. And he's been absolutely rock solid on The Voice, and it's a credit to him, to be honest. He's copped a lot of flack, some from his op-ed colleagues. He shouldn't react to that too much because it's just going to happen. But he's been absolutely rock solid, and he's got up on Sky News pretty much every night and said, this is why it's important. And he's an advocate for it. It's a little bit unusual, isn't it, Jack? I mean, the so-called Sky After Dark nonsense. The rhetoric there. But here we've got a proponent of The Voice who's been given a platform. But where's the platform elsewhere in the media, Jack?
Yeah, on Twitter, someone asked this very question. They said, he's an hour a day, every day, every week on Sky, saying yes vote. Where is the equivalent on the ABC advocating for the no vote? Doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the politics of it, Jack, because it's getting very messy. And we had I came across the words of a anonymous Liberal MP who said, we need to do over The Voice if we are going to have a chance at the next election.
I think this was, who's the chap who was the journo who is now a professor at the ANU? Is it Mark Kenny?
That's Chris's brother, yeah.
Yeah, who came up with who wrote a piece in the AFR, I think, that exposed this tweet from inside the party room. I don't think the party politics is going to determine this referendum at all. I think it's going to fail for reasons that are to do with its design and what's in the case. But there will be some politics playing out around it and after it, that's for sure.
Well, one thing this teaches us is, if this quote is correct, doing over The Voice is basically, and we know the major parties will do this from time to time, but the Liberal Party stands alone as the one that says, if it comes to the national interest or our party's interests, we know which is going to come first.
Well, I think they're all equally inclined to look at their own party interest.
They're looking at something that is potentially going to create national unity and saying, no, we would prefer that not happen, but because it will give us a better swipe at the next federal election. I think that's pretty awful.
Yeah, well, I'm reminded of the great saying, I think it's attributed to Neville Wran. If you're watching politics, always bet on the horse called self-interest because at least you know it's trying.
Indeed. No, that's Jack Lang, mate.
Jack Lang, was it?
Yeah.
And I think that applies across the board. I think there has been some politics played on both sides about this, but I don't think that's going to be relevant to who whether the referendum succeeds. But there will be some politics played afterwards.
Well, reporting the Australian again today, I know we're very Australian heavy today, but that's just the way it is. There's a report there that the No campaign fears a late surge in the yes vote, and I'll just read briefly. Senior No campaigners have warned of complacency, fears that 20 to 30% of voters will remain undecided on The Voice until polls open, and a cooling in fundraising and volunteer support, according to a leaked memo sent to Australians for Unity. That's one of those No groups. So there's a bit of concern that things will that things may sort of things that may turn around. And also in that report it says, in a coup for Anthony Albanese and Yes 23 campaigners, WA Premier Roger Cook is expected to make major amendments to controversial Aboriginal cultural heritage laws that have sparked confusion and pushback from farmers, landholders and environmental groups. We might remember, Jack, that WA was very, very pro-yes, and then it became very, very pro-no. And one of those issues is the Aboriginal cultural heritage laws, sparked by the mining company Santos, wasn't it, who blew up an Aboriginal sacred site, and then they've had this legislation out in the community discussion, which has caused a fair amount of angst among farmers and big landholders.
And generally in the community. It certainly seems as though it was a clumsy response to the Santos situation.
Yeah. The report goes on to read, the Australian understands the WA Labor government was told by senior ALP figures that its contentious three-tiered system imposing cultural assessments for ground excavation on properties exceeding 1,100 square metres was damaging the Yes campaign. So the senior Labor Party figures, and they would be parliamentary figures, I'd suggest, Jack. That might be Anthony Albanese and others, possibly the Indigenous Affairs Minister as well, Ms. Burney. They would have gone on the blower and said, "Fix it, your provincial hicks, get it done." And
the Redbridge group, their comment on the Voice was that it was almost unsalvageable. I'd go a little bit harder than that. I think it is unsalvageable. Every day that goes past, there is less certainty about what voting yes means. Every day I turn on the television, there is more confusion rather than less confusion as to what the consequences of voting yes will be, and that's fatal in a referendum in Australia.
Can we just talk about, we spent the last 2 weeks, in the media at least, worrying about treaty, Jack, and it had that ring of Mabo about it, actually. I mean, this country did land reform, and that was it. It was Mabo, it was Native Title Act. And so it just seemed to me that we got bogged down, and then Albo was wearing a T-shirt that said treaty and all these sorts of things. And then the Indigenous Affairs spokesman, who's terrific, I think, but really lacks a lot of political, shall we say. She lacks a lot of head-kicking abilities. She didn't clarify, and really I just find it very, very difficult to understand why they are not being very clear with their messaging.
Yeah, as I say, the history of Australia is that uncertainty about the referendum proposal is fatal.
Look, I just spoke last week to a person, one of the few people who's been prepared to get out and debate publicly for the yes proposition. And we had a brief chat last week, and I said, "How do you think it's going?" He goes, "Mate, we're cooked. We're cooked."
Meanwhile, the no vote's being helped along by people like Mike Carlton. I know you're not allowed to read his tweet.
Is anyone listening to Mike Carlton?
I hope not. If you're a yes voter, because he sort of divides the no voters into four camps: Duttonistas, racists, the jealous and bitter, kicking down, and F-wits. And I think if you're trying to persuade people to change their mind, that's not the way to go about it.
Well, start by calling you a fuckwit and say you can be less of a fuckwit if you do as I say. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's a winning argument every time,
Yeah, look, it's probably, and when we talk about the politics, what we're seeing is certainly the conservative right going all the way out to the far right, plus the far left. The far left are not, if we want to sort of see that represented in the independent senator, former Green member, Lydia Thorpe.
Yeah.
So there is this strange horseshoe sort of stuff going on with the politics of the Voice, Jack.
Yeah, if you look at the demographics of the people who are voting no, it's far more the people in the middle, really. It's the people in the outer suburbs and regions and all that sort of stuff. The people who we normally consider the middle, the centre ground, they're the people who are most heavily saying no. And that's because the government talked to 10% of the population about how they should go about this and left the other 90% out of the conversation.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on the Voice. We'll be talking about it every week
until October 15th.
We'll be talking a bit after October, I think too.
If the political advisors are, they should be wargaming how we're going to deal with the result now. How we're going to come out and get on the front foot.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah,
I'm sure they are. All right, over to the United States, Jack, and the Trumpsters got, I think I sang it once, twice, 3 times indicted, and probably a 4th to come. But this one's probably the most serious of them all, Jack. It relates to not just January 6th, but the events leading up to January 6th from the night of November 3, when the result of the election at that stage was not known. Now, it has been anecdotally expressed, Jack, that Trump walked around. I can't think of the name of the room, but there were 100-odd people, well-wishers there, including family and what have you. And Trump walked around the room and said, "What do I say? What do I say?" Because there was no clear winner at this stage.
Yeah.
If
I remember rightly, he had looked the winner early in the evening, and then
only because a certain number of states. In fact, the GOP had gone to the courts in many of these states to count the in-person on the day vote first. So we were seeing a lot of that.
On the early returns, he was looking really good, but that had by the time he walked around this room, by late in the evening, that had turned around.
Yeah, he was getting apparently mixed messages. This comes from Haberman, the New York Times journalist, and then apparently he got to Rudy Giuliani and he said, "What do I do?" And Giuliani just said, "Just say you won." And that was the start of it. And I actually wrote about this on Friday, that speech, where he basically started off in a reasonable sort of position. We're going well in Texas. We've won Ohio. We've won Florida. And, of course, they had. And then he moved on, we're going to win in Georgia, all this sort of stuff. And then he just goes, "Well, we have one. We have one." And I think that was the genesis of it all. That's not something that's indictable. I think a lot of people are getting a little bit confused that we have to determine Trump's state of mind on or after November 3, between November 3 and January 20, when he left office, or he left office earlier than that, but when he officially was no longer the President of the United States. But that seems to be a bit of nonsense, Jack. They've just really got to prove intent.
There's been a lot written in the American press about the way this case will pan out legally, and I've read most of it, I think. And I must confess that I don't have a great deal of confidence in any of the theories so far. That there are conflicting views, many conflicting views as to how this will pan out, and I don't think it's entirely clear. Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, he thinks it's relatively clear, and will run fairly smoothly. But there's plenty of people who don't agree with that, and there are plenty of varying reasons why they don't think it will go all that well. In any event, given that 92% of the District of Columbia, where the trial will be held, voted for Joe Biden, I would think a conviction, at least at primary level, is quite probable.
Very likely, which leads us on to
a majority of Republicans in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., don't approve of Trump or didn't vote for him. So, so the chances of finding 12 jurors who are going to give him a
good and true,
are pretty slim. The question then will be, when it goes to appeal, what happens then?
Well, there will be an effort, I imagine, from his defence to have the trial relocated.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why the prosecution in regard to the confidential and secret documents matter. Another federal indictment, is being heard in Miami. So one would imagine the numbers almost flip there.
They're
not quite. I know, not
about
Dade County,
50-50.
no.
Yeah.
I think the Dems still managed to win Dade County in 2020. I may be wrong, the
only Republican who's won Dade County recently was Ron DeSantis. But
that's right. That's right. If you're the Trumpsters' lawyer, you got a job ahead of you, basically, because he gets on well, it's not Twitter. He uses the Truth Socials. He got on there yesterday that he would be immediately asking for recusal of US District Court Judge Tanya Chutkan. That was in his messaging. And then his attorneys come back and said, look, Trump was speaking with this is a quote, layman's political sense, and was reacting primarily because Chutkan was nominated to the bench by a Democrat. She was actually confirmed 95-0 in the Senate in 2014 after being nominated by Barack Obama. It would be very difficult being the Trumpster's lawyer. In fact, Laura appeared on a podcast and he dealt with all of that, sort of saying, oh, no, look, I think you find that many of us as lawyers have difficulties in having different messages from those of our clients. So that's going to...
Anybody who's practiced law will tell you that happens.
Yeah, but he's just fired up, I mean, he must be... In the back of his mind, he must be terrified that he's going to end up in doing some time. But of course, the system, and we'll have a brief chat about this. The founding fathers had known Washington, Jefferson, Adam Smith, etc. Were probably weren't thinking that you'd have someone like Donald Trump come along, and so he could be. Certainly will be under indictment throughout the primary process, and he may actually be under conviction while being a Republican candidate for the presidency. There's nothing stopping that.
Indeed, and because of the 3 or 4 indictments or groups of indictments, he's well and truly back in the race.
Yeah, I just don't know how this is going to work. I did look at some polling. I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but when we started looking at Midwest states, I did actually, but when we started looking at it, I saw some polling in Michigan where Trump was a mile behind. And look, one thing I'll say about these indictments, I mean, people can talk about them being politicised and all that sort of stuff. After Trump's conduct from between November 3, 2020 to January 2021, I think the American people deserve to know what happened there, and that means a public trial with plenty of media coverage as to what happens in that courtroom. Not sure that it'll be televised or not, but if not, it'll be properly reported. And people need to know this because he's still going around. People still do believe that that he won the presidency.
Yeah, in my view, it's dealt him right back into the contest. I thought he would have been fading away by now because he was talking about the last election all the time, and people weren't all that interested. But the indictments have brought him back into the game. The most recent poll I saw was of a swing state, was Pennsylvania, and he's actually in front of Biden in Pennsylvania, which is quite surprising.
I think when you start getting into those Midwest values, Jack, and the thing that's going to hurt him is, particularly in this matter, this indictment, is basically the way he conducted himself. Now, whether he's found guilty or not, that's another matter. But I think this really is something that the American people need to see.
Well, there are two things about it. The court case will proceed on a legal basis and all that sort of stuff. There's the politics of it as well. And my reading of the politics of it is these 4 indictments give him a real chance of becoming the next president.
Well, when we look at
it's a dreadful miscalculation on the part of the.
That's suggesting that is suggesting politicised indictments, and I'm certainly not going down that path.
Well, the 4 indictments couldn't proceed without the support of the Democrat Party and the current president.
None of certainly the most recent indictment, there's a 4th one coming. It'll probably come out in August, and that's from Fulton County, Georgia. It's likely to be, not likely, but it's possible that it will be a RICO-style indictment on the basis of various things, computer fraud, computer crimes, fraud, obstruction of justice, in Georgia's RICO laws, 2 or more of those offences committed over 4 years can bring a RICO-style prosecution, which will be very, very interesting in itself. We'll see. I would think it's likely that 4th indictment will come in August. But the way Trump conducted himself, in my view, is something that needs to be properly examined, because you just can't have this stuff happening, and will happen, because he set the tone for elections, and we saw that in the midterms last year. We saw that in the midterms with a number of people who lost, including the Arizona gubernatorial candidate for the GOP, spitting a dummy and refusing to accept the result and all this sort of stuff. So I think this needs to be properly examined, just exactly who was calling the shots. Look, they basically were the big part of the indictment for me is Trump and others conspiring to have alternate members of the Electoral College go and vote. That's the one that stands out for me.
I just say this, that absent the 4 indictments, I don't think Trump would be a credible candidate in 2024. With them, he absolutely is. He's polling actually better now than he ever has. Right before 2016, right before 2020, this is the best polling at any stage that he's ever had. So I think the 4 indictments have dealt him right back into the game.
Very possible. And what it's done, Jack, well, perhaps not what it's done, but it has exposed Ron DeSantis. And we thought perhaps earlier this year that Ron's entrance into the presidential campaign, into the primary run for the presidency next year, presidential election next year, would be a breath of bring on a breath of relief from the GOP. He's really stalled, hasn't he? The polling's not looking all that flash for him. I do see there's bits and pieces where he's ahead of Biden and all that sort of stuff, but that's fantasy land stuff.
Well, he's got to get to Biden first in any event, and at the moment he's 30 points behind Trump, and that's largely driven off the back of the 4 indictments.
Yeah.
He certainly DeSantis has made some errors. He botched his launch, etc. But what's really driven his numbers down are the indictments that Trump's facing.
Yeah. Now, look, it's very possible. But there is a chance for him, Jack, to make a name for himself. The California governor, Gavin Newsom, has said, come on, let's have a debate. And DeSantis, again, just looks really shaky. And I saw one of Newsom's staffers just saying, they want to impose this, they want to have this rule and that rule, and they don't want, they basically want to reduce DeSantis's exposure to the nation. So I'd suggest if that's the way through this debate, if that's the way you want to go about being a presidential candidate, then I don't think you've got much hope.
Well, I read a very full report of the negotiations about the debate, and it just seemed to me like the usual the arguments that candidates have before a debate.
But it was
nothing
reducing
about it.
DeSantis' time on stage and reducing his time being questioned.
Oh, it's 90 minutes with no notes, so there's not much chance of hiding in those circumstances. What will tell us something is when the debate actually takes place. That's the argy-bargy about who gets to do what in a debate is just completely situation normal for politics.
I reckon Newsom will eat him alive. That's what I think.
Well, he has got very good hair.
He has got very good hair, but he's also really impressive on his feet. And he can talk in that way where you would have to go away and do some research to see where he's got a few things wrong. He's not always that forthcoming. But I think he's a pretty good performer. Look, we've got a little thing here. Are we to blame for Donald Trump, Jack? Are we all somehow to blame? Did you watch The Apprentice? Did you ever watch that? I think anyone who watched The Apprentice is to blame.
Did you? Are you referring to the wonderful piece by David Brooks in the New York Times?
Yeah. Well, you've cited it, yeah.
Yeah. He made the mistake of sticking in a paragraph in the middle of it, which says, "We in the educated class are always publicly speaking out for the marginalised," and that's led to a whole genre on Twitter at the moment of people saying, "I'm always going to use 'we in the educated class' somewhere in a column that I write." There's other journalists who are writing this
It's
now.
one of those things you just don't do. But, look, there's a lot of these. There have been quite a few of these op-eds that getting along to our politics has failed and this is why Donald Trump came along. He's a con artist, He was never going to do anything differently. That's what I blame. Those people who watched The Apprentice in number and thought this guy's actually really good at business when he's actually not.
Whenever anyone says politics has failed, what they really mean is I'm not getting what I want out of politics.
Exactly right. Yeah, very, very well said. All righty. Russia and the Ukraine, Jack. Just there's a report just in today, the BBC, at least 5 people have been killed in a Russian missile attack on residential buildings in the eastern Ukrainian town of Pokrovsk. 4 civilians and an official were killed and 31 people injured. Very, very nasty stuff. Another report, Jack, just in regard to drones. Last week, a Russian tanker with 11 crew members was hit by what Moscow said was a Ukrainian attack in the Black Sea. Although Ukraine did not comment publicly, a security service source told the BBC a sea drone had been used. And these are like powerboats that are loaded to the gunnels with explosives, and they just basically operated from remotely with a keypad. And off they go, and they take out ships, and you'll find the Russian military will fight like crazy at them.
Sort of like a kamikaze attack, but with no pilot.
Yeah, that's right. It's exactly like that. And they'll try and blow it out of the water, but if they don't succeed, look out, boom, you're going to get it. And there's no chance of missing. There's all GPS tracking and all that sort of stuff. Meanwhile, Jack, we just want to get a proper feel of the sort of oppression that goes on in Russia. Alexei Navalny, fresh from being poisoned by the regime, is facing an even longer stint in jail. I think he was originally sentenced to 8 years, and now it's looking like it'll be go up to 19 years. Navalny was accused of creating an extremist community, financing extremist activities, and a number of other crimes. He was found guilty on Friday at the high-security penal colony in which he has been detained. We can only wonder about how awful that place would be, Jack. So this is the business of just getting rid of your opposition, isn't it?
It is.
And Navalny was already in jail, but he is one of the great hopes for a Russia post-Putin, but God only knows what sort of condition he is in at the moment. I'd expect that to be awful. The trial took place behind closed doors at the IK6 penal colony at Melikovo, around 155 miles east of Moscow, where he is being held. I'd suggest there's a fair bit of ugliness going on at that place at any given time, Jack.
Probably is. It is slightly amusing to me that on Twitter yesterday I noticed that some of the same people who are salivating over the prospect of Donald Trump being put in jail are very upset about the Russian opposition leader being put in jail.
Well, I think it's quite different circumstances, Jack. I mean,
yeah, but it's still amusing.
It's not amusing. I don't find it.
Well, him being put in jail is not amusing, but the difference in approach is amusing.
I don't find Navalny's in the position that he's in after being poisoned and near death for a few days and now being taken away, I would say almost certainly tortured and then jailed and then given further charges. It just tells you what a stinking, rancid regime Putin runs. Speaking of stinking rancid regimes, Jack. Niger under coup. What's going to happen there? Is this likely to lead to conflict in Western Africa?
Well, there's already conflict in Western Africa. The importance of Niger was that...
multinational conflict, Jack.
Yeah. A Western commentator was saying that Niger has been seen as the West's last reliable counter-terrorism partner in a region where coups have been common in recent years. Orders have rejected former coloniser France and turning towards Russia. Wagner, the Wagner Group, has got a new name now, I think, doesn't it? Operates in a handful of African countries, including Mali, where human rights groups have accused its forces of deadly abuses. Plus, they have a problem with Islamic terrorism in the area.
They do.
It's a very messy situation, and Niger is going to, if they can solve the Niger problem, there's some prospect of making this move in the right direction. If they can't, they can't.
Well, Acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland visited Niger and had conversations with Niger's military leaders and in what she later describes as extremely frank and at times quite difficult. Washington has said the coup can still be ended diplomatically, and President Mohamed Bazoum reinstated, but has suspended aid payments in the meantime. Niger has basically been shut off. You've got Western African nations surrounding it who are terribly concerned about the coup that have basically shut the country down.
Yeah. It's a fair bit to play out there.
A fair bit to play out there.
Yeah.
The coup leaders are playing a very dangerous game.
Yeah, a lot to play out, but it is very important what happens because it could determine what happens right across Western Africa.
All right, turn of the hour, and it is time to get stuck into sport because we've got a fair bit to get through. We do want to do some scorecards because there's been some wonderful things. Of course, the Ashes wrapped up last week. Now none of us know what to do at night times, and scrolling through Netflix and what have you to look for something that we can watch and enjoy. I did see Stephen Fry's comments on the game, Jack, and cricket is a tomato.
The fabulous actor Stephen Fry is currently president of the Marylebone Cricket Club.
Yes, he is.
Which he says it's a really good job. He says it's a little bit like being a cross between a regimental mascot, the goat that they put a uniform on, and the Queen Mother. They kind of wheel you out to look important at things. And the best advice he got from one of the few non-cricketing presidents of the MCC who preceded him was from Tim Rice, the composer, who said, one thing that'll happen to you, Stephen, is you'll put on weight while you're doing this job. So I think the job involves a fair bit of lunching and dinnering. But Stephen Fry was a really good on a podcast. He was. I think he's
a great selection.
He's a beautiful speaker, and he was talking about how the cricket world works today, and he says the cricket is like the tomato. You look at the cuisine of Italy and various other places, and the tomato is central to it. But the tomato doesn't come from there; it comes from South America. And the French don't own the potato. The potato comes from Peru. And in the same way, but the Peruvians and the South Americans generally, they don't get to own what happens to the tomato now. And he says, that's what cricket is like. We might have started it here in England, but the centre of activity for it now, the centre of the gravity for cricket now is the subcontinent.
Well, it's India and the BCCI. And they are a very powerful group determining the future of the game by fixtures, by competitions, etc. And there's no getting around that. I mean, that's where the money is in cricket. I saw a Joe Rogan podcast where, to Joe's great surprise, he was told who's got the second largest audience in sport, and of course it's cricket. Obviously soccer or football is number one, and number two is, and he couldn't quite believe it. And then he was told the Instagram numbers for Virat Kohli, and again, it's just one of those things that Americans don't often see. But baseball is very much a second string a sport in most parts of the world compared with cricket, and particularly in Asia. It won't always come with good outcomes. I mean, Test cricket is something that I think the players deeply enjoy playing, but more and more, I mean, look, England's own fixture created an Ashes series of 5 tests over 2 months so they could make way for the 100, their Big Bash equivalent. And the theory behind that is not it's all about cash and money, but the way you engage young people into cricket is the best way to do that is through the short form of the game. And I don't know if you did, Jack, but we've talked about this before. But when we looked at those test audiences at the Oval, at Lord's, at Old Trafford, etc., you didn't see a lot of young faces there.
That's partly because of the ticket prices.
Yeah, well, the ticket. I mean, even the 5th day's play, where ticket prices are reduced, and so you still didn't see many kids there. And so it is an acquired taste. But Test cricket is not necessarily a 5-day test is not necessarily going to whet the appetite of a 7 or 8 year old kid. And so we're going to have to deal with that shortened form of the game really imposing itself. I see there were big competitions in the United States, largely with Adam Zampa was having a game there. Lots of T20 being played, I think, in Texas, but don't quote me on that. I just saw.
Yeah, there's a lot of rich Indian tech billionaires,
big crowds,
who are funding T20 cricket in Texas in particular.
Yeah, and look, big crowds, and it's probably engaging the West Indies population to cricket again. That was sort of really slipping off the radar there. We'd always thought it was basketball that would sort of really challenge cricket, but it's football again that is really cutting into their markets there. T20 is a game where you can engage young people and some older folk along the way who might have lost a bit of interest in cricket. One thing, Jack, just in regard to the Ashes, did the English have a drink with the Australians afterwards or not?
Well, the Australians waited round until about 10:30, I think, to be invited into the England.
Having a libation.
Yeah. I think Steve Smith went over and knocked on the door about 4 times and couldn't get in. Richard Hines, the wonderful sports journalist from Australia, retired, I think. He posted something really good on Twitter. It was just a simple photo of Richie Benaud and Frank Worrell after having a beer together after the tied test, with a comment from Richard along the lines of, even those of us who play club cricket, for those of us who play club cricket, this is one of the most precious memories you take away from the game, is that getting together with your opponents after the game. And it didn't really happen post the Test series. I believe they met up in a nightclub later, but that's not quite the same thing.
Well, you might recall, Jack, the previous Australian Tour of England Ashes series there 4 years ago, there was a photo published, and it ran in the Australian and it ran throughout the media, of all of both squads in one of, I presume, England's changing room. It doesn't really matter, and all sitting around having a beer and a chat. And it's kind of what sports should be about. It's not always going to be about that, but once the last shots are fired in anger, and the game's well and done, that's kind of the beauty of cricket, isn't it?
Yeah, I saw a great interview with Michael Atherton and Alan Donald a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about a great spell Alan Donald bowled to Mike Atherton, and at one stage, Mike Atherton got a pretty clear glove on something, and it was caught, and of course he didn't walk. And Alan Donald went completely nuts at him for not walking, etc., etc. And they walked in after the game, and Mike Atherton had got the Jeroboam of champagne for the man of the match. And he took that in there to get Alan Donald to sign it for him. And he took in his glove with the great red mark on it from where the ball had hit it. And he signed that and gave it to Alan Donald. Everyone had a beer and was happy.
Yeah, look, Michael Atherton is a great force for good in cricket, isn't he? He's a wonderful commentator, brilliant writer. And, of course, he takes, McGrath's Bunny and all that sort of stuff. He takes that all in his stead, never overrates his performances. Were very significant for England for a very, very long time, saved a lot of tests off his own bat. We'll talk a little bit more about. We're going to get through the AFL, and of course, we can't leave the World Cup alone. We'll get to that in a little while. But there's a little story here the ABC's reported on King Island's Footy League, and it is basically on its knees. And I think there were 3 clubs there, weren't there?
Yeah, there are 3 clubs. Yeah,
there are 3 clubs there, and they play each other. I mean, there's obviously a bye every week. But King Island down in the south of down south of
Bass Strait.
Yeah, Bass Strait, Victoria. They've had that comp going for a long time now, and it looks like it's finally, it's on its last legs. And I think that's great. It's hugely sad because we forget just the contributions that sports clubs make to people's lives, and they are almost always a force for good too.
Yeah, well, I grew up in country towns, and they're incredibly important in country towns. Your football club, your tennis club, your cricket clubs, they're the kind of glue that holds the place together.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I saw too. I mean, I was a member of long standing at Montmorency. I was a secretary of the club, an opening batsman of the ones, and for a while anyway, and I always keep an eye on things to see how things are going down there. I was in conversation with their president, or not the president now, but a couple of years ago, and they were holding, because there had been one of the Montmorency footballers sadly had passed away due to suicide, and so the clubs started, the footy and the cricket clubs, both started bringing people in. To hold discussions with the players, with those associated with the club, get around people who you think might be struggling, those sorts of things. They are really strong drivers of community, and I can tell you too, if you're in the business of wanting new facilities, new nets, new bit of money, politicians understand the nature of it too. We would often go to our local councillors and our state members and the federal member and say, well, we'd like, and if you got a good hearing, you'd get those new nets, you might get the new club rooms, because politicians understand the nature of how compelling these places are.
Yeah, and people, even the contributors, even the volunteers that these places run on.
Well, they're all volunteers, yeah.
Yeah. They get a fair bit back out of it in the sense of just a real part of your life. It becomes, that's your weekends set up for winter and summer, The last place I actually played footy at, I got taken for a beer by the president, who says, look, we're going to give you the Best Clubman Award and we want you to be vice president and come on the committee next year, which I think was a polite way of saying you're a terrible player at the moment.
Yeah. Often was the way things would go. You get a committee position because you weren't going all that well. Yeah, look.
But I got a hell of a lot back out of that, of the time that I put in doing that, a great deal of joy and fun, and wonderful
friendships
contacts.
Made for life, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I still keep a very close eye on Montmorency Cricket Club, where I was involved for more than 20 years, and it was It was, I was president of an amateur football club too for a couple of years, and much like you, not much of a football, but slow.
I always say that a couple of bad broken ankles and a lack of talent held me back.
Well, look, I used to have very good evasive skills, no pace. But then I did the knee and the sideways stuff just gone. And I remember coming back and getting tackled very roughly, very quickly, and thought, maybe I should be president of the club. Maybe I'll be contributing more that way. So, look, it's a shame. Look, these things, and we're seeing it a bit more in country Victoria. I don't know if you've seen it, Jack, but they're getting old AFL players out of retirement, and Gary Ablett Jr., Nathan Buckley before he did his hammy, and they're coming and they're playing as sort of as guests of the club.
Yeah,
and I think that's a great initiative.
Daisy Thomas, very funny man. He does it all the time. He does it at least one a year. And it's a great idea, I think.
Yeah, it's a terrific idea. Well, back into, and we'll get to the soccer, but very, very important things, Jack. Carlton with 7 in a row, beating the Saints, who are very, very good. I'm actually impressed by them. They were very hard at the footy. St Kilda.
Are they at the Sarah Sands yet?
Not quite yet. It's a very different Carlton Football Club now. I think they're the story. They've got Melbourne this week. Now, we're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves, Jack, but I think if they beat Melbourne, they're just about go to premiership favouritism, because they're beating everybody else with the exception of Brisbane Lions and they're beating Port Adelaide, and there's not much else there they haven't beaten, and they will be a force to be reckoned with come the finals. Should they make it, they're still a win away from doing that.
For those of us, those listeners who are not Melbourne residents, the Sarah Sands is a dreadful pub.
It's gone.
At the start of Brunswick, and the locals used to say, well, if you're at the Sarah Sands, you're almost back in town.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sadly the Sarah Sands is gone.
It's no loss. It was a dreadful boozer.
My good mate Ray Mooney, who chronicles a lot of true crime, and he was mourning the loss of the Sarah Sands. I think the last time I saw it, they had lunchtime strippers and things like that, which is kind of, that's the last thing you do before you hit the deck as a publican. Carlton is one of the big stories now. So. We'll see how they go. My beloved Blues played beautifully on the weekend, and they've got a much deeper list now. They're not relying on half a dozen every week. They've got blokes that getting around, and a few ex-Swannies who are going very, very well. Swannies did all right too on the weekend and not out of it. In fact, you've got a very, very tight run for the final 8. Who's your tip to make up the bottom 4?
I think all the way from 5 until 14, 5th till 14th on the ladder.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to be too far there, but yeah, fair enough. No, it's mathematically possible.
Yeah, all the way down there. So I don't think there'll be much change for all of that. For all that there are a lot of other clubs who've got a chance that they might sneak in. Yeah.
No, Swannies certainly aren't out of it. Richmond had a bit of a shocker. They've fallen back into the pack, but there's still a half a chance. Yeah, so very, very tight finish to the AFL season. The NRL was a bit the same too. But, of course, we cannot go past the efforts of the Matildas, who had a 2-0 defeat of Denmark. It was one of those sporting events, Jack, where I just got the sense that everyone in the country was watching it. I haven't seen the ratings figures. They were near enough to 2 million in the first game. And I suspect they were a bit bigger last night again. Australia looked very nervous early on. Did you watch the game?
I did. And even in Hong Kong, there were 50 or 60 or 70 people on a Monday night at a pub in Soho, all cheering madly. And, of course, the English fans had been there as well. So,
Look, they were knocking the ball around and they were coughing it up a little bit, and Denmark basically controlled possession. And then on the counter, it was actually a beautiful goal, wasn't it, the first goal? I think Mary Fowler put the ball through to just an excellent pass. And then, I'm just trying to think of her first name, but forward,
Caitlin
Ford, took the ball, little tap on, and then bang straight in the corner. A little bit more chaotic in the second half, but Hayley Razzo once delivered a pass. She put the ball into the corner of the net as well. They're a very good side, and getting a ticket to see them play is, well, it's the hottest ticket in town, Jack.
It's just terrific to see women's sport, not just in the football, but in other, in cricket and AFLW. Finally getting the numbers through the gate and the eyeballs on the television, and that's the key to getting proper rewards.
Well, yeah, I think there's something a little bit more than that too, Jack, in certain parts of the world anyway. I don't know if you've seen Morocco. Morocco got spanked 6-0 by Germany in their first round game, in their first game, and then had a couple of wins. They beat South Korea. And results went their way, and they're through to the quarterfinals. And in Morocco, and we just got a little comment here from a fellow watching it. He said, before the girls started playing, people said, go back to your kitchen. And this is from Miriam Ulfatmi, I should say, a 27-year-old from Khenifra, Morocco. And he said, but then after they win, they say, oh, those are the lionesses of the Atlas. He said the whole vibe changed after their success. Isn't that lovely?
Yep.
All right. Take us out, Jack.
Look, this is an election story. I saw this on Twitter. If you ever feel useless, imagine being the guy who had to count the 17,540,544 ballots in the 2019 North Korean election, and every single one of them said Kim Jong-un.
Well, I think you would think that would be a useless task. But let me tell you, he's looking for the one that says something else.
And the response came immediately: projected winner.
Projected winner. Yeah, but he'd be looking for something that didn't spell Kim Jong-un's name properly or anything, and then they'd be off to the camps, Jack.
They'd be eating very poor quality bark indeed.
Or strapped to a tree and hit with artillery missiles. What a terrible bastard he is, and his family for that matter. Thank you very much for your time today, Jack, and your opinions, particularly in regard to the Higgins Lehrmann matter. I think we can call it that. We've got about 6 names for it at the moment, but it's all come to a head, and it is very, very messy. Thank you for your opinions and your analysis today. And thank you, listeners, for listening to us once again this week. And we just want to remind you that if you want to get involved in the program, please drop us a line. You can hit me up on Twitter. I'm less active on it these days, but you can always find me through my DMs. Always open there. And Jack, you can hit up Hong Kong Jack on his Substack. Give me the address there, please, Jack.
HongKongJack.substack.com, and you'll find a confession up there at the moment. I actually confessed that I had got an election prediction quite wrong.
Which one?
The United States presidential election. So you can read what I thought I got wrong.
What 2020 you got wrong?
No, 2024.
Oh, well, we haven't had it yet, Jack. You don't need to self-flagellate yet. I know you Catholics are very big on these things. Tighten up the cerisi on the leg.
I've got something awfully wrong, and I'm prepared to put my hand up and say it. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. There's some honesty for you. So you can get on Jack's Substack and give him a good flogging for it.
Yeah, do that.
And thank you, listeners, once again. We'll be back with you next week with the 2 Jacks. See ya.
Cheers.